must register their firearm in the Provost Marshal's office. That's what PMO stands for, if you don't know. All privately owned firearms contained in-house in on-base housing must be kept in a secure container. Hardback case, gun safe, gun lock, whatever it is, it must fully enclose the firearm, and it must be capable of being locked. Also, there has to be a trigger lock put on the weapon as well. Yes, inside the fully encased container. All your ammunition must be stored separately. You can have it in the house, but you can't keep the gun loaded. No firearms at all are allowed in the barracks. You are allowed to own a gun, but when you do, you are required to turn that into your commanding officer, who will provide a place of safekeeping. Basically, they're going to keep it in the unit armory, and they're going to give you a receipt for it. It's a real pain to check it in and out should you want to go shooting like that. This is all assuming, of course, you've gone through the tedious and convoluted process of applying for a permit in the first place, which requires your commanding officer's signature, requires an in-state permit if you don't have one, or if your resident permit, say I'm from Texas, if that didn't transfer over to North Carolina, you'd have to go through. And that includes all training, both military and state required classes. So as you can see, owning a firearm on base is fairly restricted. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, even though we're all supporters of our Second Amendment. We are not saying that every Marine should have a gun on them at all times. If you've ever been to the barracks on a payday Friday night, you totally understand the barracks policy. And while we firmly support the right of a man to defend his home and his family and his household, it doesn't require an arsenal to do so, be it on or off base. But given the current climate in our nation, with acts of terror being committed on targets both military and civilian, is it really unreasonable that we want to arm our servicemen to provide security for the more vulnerable areas, such as recruiting stations or even large gathering events, such as ceremonies or concerts that occur on base? Well, actually, the military as a whole is kind of moving in that direction. In fact, there is a rule that exists for that, but I'll let Derek.
We're going to go through current events first.
So, now, even though it seems that a military base would be properly protected and everything, shootings on bases are actually not that uncommon. Since 1942, there have actually been 26 shootings on United States bases. Most of these actually weren't even just enemies of the state. They were just regular soldiers or contractors or just military members that may have had some mental trauma, or they just had a personal issue going on and they just decided to start shooting. It sounds like something that can just happen any day. It doesn't even have to be an attack. One of the greatest examples of this would be the Fort Hood massacre back in 2009. Major Nidal Malik Hansen, he had something to do with mental health, but he was an officer and he had unloaded on dozens of unarmed soldiers and civilians that were on the base at the time. He killed 13 members. He killed 13 people that day, along with wounding 32 others. The only weapons he had on him at this time was an FN 5.7 pistol and a Smith & Wesson 357 Magnum revolver. Think about a revolver. That takes a lot of time to reload. You don't have clips. You don't have anything like that. You have to literally unload 6 bullets and load 6 at a time. And even with just that and just one other pistol, he was still able to hurt and injure all those people. Think about it. If someone had a pistol at the time, maybe while he was reloading, you never know what could have happened. But just because most of these shootings are done by fellow military members and contractors, that's not always the case. Most recently, we had the Chattanooga, Tennessee shootings back in 2015. This was seen to be as an act of terrorism. The shooter was Muhammad Yusuf Abdul Aziz, and he did a drive-by shooting of a recruiter station down in Tennessee. The weapons he had on him was a AK-47 style semi-automatic rifle, a Saiga 12 shotgun, and a 9mm handgun. That guy is pretty heavily armed, so you thought it was bad when a guy just had 2 pistols and he was unloading on people. Now you have a man that's basically ready for war, and he's unloading on our unarmed military members. And it's out in town too, it's not even on a base. Yet we still have to be unarmed in uniform. That left 4 Marines dead and 1 sailor dead. And of course it also injured some Marines and even some policemen that went down and chased after it. So just because it seems like it's a little hard for these shootings to happen, doesn't mean it's impossible. And if we're unarmed, how are we able to defend ourselves?
So Now I'm going to get into why we should be able to conceal carry. First off, firearms are the essential tools soldiers use to protect us from terrorists, despots, and foreign enemies. The U.S. military goes to great lengths to ensure that we're all trained and qualified in using these weapons. Yet for whatever reason, the government doesn't trust us with guns when we're not training or in a combat team. Now, you sit here and ask yourself why. Why do they trust us to use these weapons to fight our enemies, but don't trust us to protect ourselves? Senator Ted Cruz said, the men and women in our military have been at war for over a decade. They understand the responsibilities that go along with carrying a firearm, yet our Second Amendment rights are removed at the front gate. That's something that we're all born with, right? Our rights. We have our rights to speak freely, to be able to carry a weapon, but when we come on our base, our rights are taken away. I think that's a little crazy. But like you saw in our skit earlier, the first guy came in, identified the shooter, and what happened? He got killed, and the rest of the class got killed. So he had no means of protecting himself from that shooter. Now the second part, with the gentleman being able to conceal carry, he was able to put the shooter down because he knew it was a threat and he had a weapon to help him take out that threat. So now the Air Force is starting to get into the prospects of having airmen in a concealed carry on base. Now the programs are Unit Marshal, Security Forces Staff, Army, and Law Enforcement Officer Security Act programs. Under the Unit Marshal program, unit commanders can have airmen to train under Security Forces personnel and open carry an M9 pistol at their duty location. So maybe it's not concealed carry, it's open carry, so everyone will know that airman's carrying. But that's a step in the right direction. And like they said, they have to go through more training, and they have to be like under supervision of military police people. So not only will they be able to protect themselves, but they're going to have more training on the weapon, which will help them in certain situations like we saw earlier. Airmen selected for the UMP would be instructed in the use of force, weapons retention, and weapons training. The role of these airmen will be to protect themselves, their immediate workspace, and the people within it. So you ask yourself, why wouldn't we want this? Why would that be a bad thing? To be able to protect yourself, protect your friends, protect your peers. How's that? What's the bad? Can anyone give me a bad reason as to why we wouldn't want that? No, exactly. So Congress says that they're not going to take back what they think because it's going to cost money, lots of money to train, and they see safety in terms of money, and I don't think that's right because it's people's lives at stake. Chattanooga, like, what happens if they were allowed to have their M4s in there and they heard a shooter? Or if they were allowed to have their M9 pistol, they could have saved one or two, maybe. Maybe we'll never know, but the thought of them not being able to protect themselves in a situation like that, it's heartbreaking. So now I'm going to pass it on to my expert, James, to take us out.
Thank you, Derek. So, we've learned a couple different spectrums on what the firearm policy is on base, and you all can probably guess by now, we think that it should be changed, and at the very least allow loosening to allow you to be a actually qualified concealed carry permit holder, at least while on base. So, I'm going to come up with a couple of the opposition or opposing facts that I was able to find during my research. And I want to just first off point off that from what I understood and from what I researched, a lot of what is going against this push to allow armed service members to carry weapons on base, it seems to be really just one of the appeals to people that is really pushing that agenda. So we already know about 3 appeals that we learned in this class. Who can tell me one of them? Okay, I didn't even throw you on the spot like that. One of them is logos, which is what type of appeal? A logical appeal. Another one is ethos, which is a credibility appeal, and the last one is pathos. That's right, pathos, an emotional appeal. Now, whenever somebody sees some of these deadly, dangerous, evil-looking guns, particularly civilians, because people who do not have ready interaction with it, they see them as evil, and so they make a pathos appeal to it. They don't understand. They're meant to kill. They're normal, well-respected citizens. They don't want to kill anybody. They don't want to be killed. So obviously guns are bad. So if we just limit our take on guns, then then no bad things will happen with guns. That's now mind you, that's a very oversimplification of very complex and actually legitimate concerns that people have about people carrying firearms. I was able to tie it down to a few points. One of them being the Paz y Comitatus Act of 1878. Has anybody here ever heard that term? Anybody familiar with it at all? So the Paz y Comitatus Act was enacted to pretty much ensure that the military would not be used as a policing agency. Policing is going to be left to the police, with the exception of the National Guard, which can be activated in times of crisis at the request of the state. That means that Gunnery Sergeant Jones at no point in time will ever, should never, have the authority to take out his Glock 19 Gen 4, go down there and start policing the block. The only thing I'm going to be allowed to use that for, according to my concealed carry permit, is for my own personal self-defense. People are worried that arming Marines, airmen,